Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall. Today I'm joined by none other than Cliff Wilson, one of the most highly regarded natural bodybuilding coaches in the world. Cliff has guided countless athletes to the top with an unparalleled eye for detail and a coaching philosophy that pushes the boundaries of what's possible. In this episode, we'll dive into some fascinating topics, including reflections on our own coach-client journey. Cliff took me to win my pro card in 2024 and all the way to worlds on the pro stage, the kind of biggest stage in the natural bodybuilding world there is. The science and art behind peak conditioning, we'll discover kind of Cliff's thoughts behind that, and the unique approach we took for my rapid backload ahead of show day. Cliff will also share his insights on post-show strategies, reverse diet, recovery diet, future plans, and where he believes my focus should be moving forward as an athlete. So guys, lots to take home, and if you do enjoy this episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Share it, whether or not that's a screenshot, a photo, all that good stuff over on your stories on Instagram. Give me and Cliff a tag so we can come and see it and share it, or thank you for listening in and tuning in, and so more people can become aware of the podcast. Give us a nice review if you're listening over on Spotify. A comment on YouTube always goes very far, and a thumbs up is always appreciated. So thank you guys. So whether or not you're a competitor, coach, or just someone looking to understand the nuances of elite level bodybuilding, you're in for a treat. Let's get into the chat. So Cliff, we have just completed my 2024 season. We're at the end of this year. This will come out in 2025. I don't know why I felt like I needed to make that clear. But the first question I had for you, Cliff, I'm going to start on like I don't know if this is a hot one, but how was I as a client? How was I?
Oh, yeah, you made it easy, man. You made it easy. Sometimes I say when you're working with clients, you get some clients that you're kind of like, you're either the gas or the brakes. And to be honest with you, it's an easier and more enjoyable spot as the coach where sometimes you have to play more of the brakes than the gas. You know what I mean? And someone like you who's obviously passionate about it. I mean, you do these interviews, you've got Revive Stronger, you've got everything. So it's like, you have your own gas. You know what I mean? The biggest thing that I usually had to play was the brakes. Hey, let's not go too hard too soon. And honestly, that's a spot that is so enjoyable as a coach where you have this shared passion and it's really just about the path to get there. So I had a great time.
That's good. Yeah, it's interesting. I never really thought about it because now I hadn't had a coach that I was checking in with like consistent. Well, I haven't had one since 2014. So 10 years, literally my first season I had one. I haven't had a coach since. I've only had people I've kind of spoken to. So it was really interesting being on that side of the fence and being like, how much do I want to give Cliff versus not give him? What do I want from my clients when they're doing that? And it's kind of like, I think of if they're not giving me enough, I'll ask them questions. So I'm kind of like, if Cliff wants something from me, I think he'll ask. So I'll give him what just comes to mind with me.
Yeah, and I was kind of curious about that as we got into it because I have been told, obviously I don't know what other coaches' processes are, but I've been told that my coaching style is a little more fluid, and I do prefer it to be that way. In that, like, I want my clients to choose what they tell me. I don't do the spreadsheets like a lot of coaches do because I was talking with this to someone else just the other day where like if you have a spreadsheet where it's like macros, body weight, sleep, stress, I don't like to ask questions about things that aren't a problem. It's like maybe I ask about sleep and they're tracking sleep every day and they're writing down 6 hours and 55 minutes. Well, it's 5 minutes short of 7 hours. They probably wouldn't gear that as a problem in their head, but then they write the 6 hours and they're like, oh, this isn't quite 7, is it a problem? And now they are in their head. So I don't like to dig into things that the client doesn't view as a problem. And then I maybe identify some problems along the way and we kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think for me, it was uncomfortable at first. And that's part of the reason I chose you, Cliff, was because I knew you coached and you thought in a way that was different to me. And I wanted to learn what that was like. But I think, it wasn't one of those where I have those things under control, so I don't I'm not tracking them myself on like a daily basis, my like sleep and stuff. But with some of my clients, they need a little bit more of a nudge, or they won't tell me if their sleep has been terrible. So I kind of find it as like, without data, I'm blind. And sometimes I find as a coach, I need that extra data, but the clientele you work with maybe are generally better at that, or you've just found it hasn't ended up being a problem.
Yeah, usually there's signs. You know what I mean? If a person's like, I can even tell in a person's writing style. If their writing style seems frantic or develops into a more frantic tone, then I'm like, how's your sleep? How's your stress? You know what I mean? Like, honestly, you can even tell differences in people's punctuation, how their sentences align.
That's so funny.
Yeah, you can really, the signs are there usually. Usually, and I'm like, hey, how are things going?
Yeah, I know, at least with me, you mentioned like the gas and the brakes. I tried to do it as, again, in terms of like my communication to you was, I didn't really want to say too much of what I thought we should do. I just wanted to know what you thought we should do. And if you had any questions for me to inform what you think we should do, I was like leaving it at that. Because I imagine coaching a coach can sometimes be like, they want to just coach themselves and be like, no, I think we should do this. And I was like, I want to be the person that's the client here, so I'll let you just take the helm.
I thought you brought a good amount. You know what I mean? Like I mean, at this point, it's funny because I do coach so many coaches. It's kind of become my main demographic, to be honest with you. I would venture to say probably half or more of my clients are coaches at one level or another. And but I thought you did a good job of you always, I guess the funny thing is like you weren't like I want to do this, but you did sort of point in the directions of what you thought, which I actually found helpful, because you're your own person. And I guess the thing is you've coached yourself for such a long time, you have a lot of valuable insight. Someone as experienced and as knowledgeable as you have knowledge about your own body that I just don't have, if that makes sense. And you always did a really good job of letting me know those situations where you knew something I didn't. And then it kind of informed my choices.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, it's the thing I know that I wanted to learn. This might actually bring us to a topic that I wasn't necessarily intending to start here, but I'll start with it. Was in previous, I know my last prep, like I was in positions where I was like, when someone's stage ready, but they're not like all the way in where they could potentially be. And this for me was always like the last place to go is the glutes, and how in can I get them? And that I think for us was one of the areas, like, can we get the rear of the like striations through the glutes? And I was like, I wanted those lines from like butthole to like all the way to the side of the glute.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, it was always a question in my mind, like in previous preps, so I just not pushed myself hard enough. Did I need to just dig further, bring the body weight down, bring cardio up, whatever it needed to be? And I was like, hey, Cliff is one of the most experienced coaches I could ever hope for. I think if there's anyone that's going to kind of direct me and identify whether or not I had been doing the right call in the past or what have you, we're going to learn. So yeah, we kind of ended up getting to that point of, hey, should we keep digging, and how's that resulting? And we learned a bit there. And I guess the topic of question is, you mentioned in one of our email exchanges, this kind of, I think you called it like a genetic cap for fat loss. And so I'd love to talk about that a little bit more.
Okay. So yeah, you are absolutely right about getting those glute striations in extremely deep. There are multiple factors, and you named a couple of them that go into. I would say the usual case of not getting those glutes in is that somebody hasn't dug deep enough to get there, or there's instances where they've almost dug too deep too fast. I've found that people that crash diet, you're never going to get those deep glute striations. Early in my career, I thought not getting those deep glute striations when people push too hard. Early in my career, I thought it was muscle loss, but I've kind of changed in the last, I don't know, 7-8 years, I've changed my thought on that. And it's probably an inflammatory response. I've suspected that it seems like when people lose too quickly, too fast, they always look filmy at the end. It's not just isolated to the glutes either. It's like a whole body puffiness that exists. And I think you've seen the look that I'm talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. I know exactly what you mean.
And this is where I act as the brakes for a lot of clients, because some of them want it so bad, they'll be like, I'll eat dirt and I'll run through brick walls if you need me to. And I'm like, well, actually, I want, and this is hard for a lot of bodybuilders. I say, I want this process to feel as easy as possible. Because the more it's not about what your brain wants. I think some bodybuilders actually enjoy eating dirt and running through brick walls. And I say that like your body perceives all of this as stress. Stress isn't just your boss, in your ear and having problems with your wife. Stress is, I'm pushing myself too hard. I'm not sleeping, that kind of stuff. And it's like it all goes into the same bucket. And so I try to minimize stress as much as possible in all forms. And part of that is I don't even want you to feel like you're in prep in the early stages. I mean, you and I went through the early part of prep. I mean, it was like, take some food away. Oh, we're going to add it back. Take some food away. We're going to add it back. You know what I mean? Like we were constantly towing that line where I was trying to make it where you didn't have lengthy periods where you feel like you were stressing your body. And so I think that's one of the first primary reasons. The other one is, obvious, just not getting body fat low enough. And then the last one that I commonly see, well, and then there's also peaking issues. Somebody doesn't, they don't get their, because you do need to be carb loaded properly. If you're not filled out, the muscle tissue isn't going to push against the skin and you're not going to get those deep striations. If your sodium and potassium levels are wonky for your body type, then once again, you're going to have fluid in that area. But kind of brings us to the last one, which we discussed, is that I don't think a lot of people realize that there is a genetic limit to body fat. You can't just get, and I get this all the time where sometimes I'll get a first time competitor and they'll be like, I really want to get glutes and they'll name one of my clients, you know what I mean? This first time competitor, they've only been training 4 years. And the person they just named has been training for 16 years, and so the thing they don't realize is that there is a genetic limit with body fat. I'm going to explain why the training age matters, because first off, we all have genetics play into this. We all have a genetic individual body fat limit. And a lot of the research shows that we have the body fat cell count, the number of body fat cells on our entire body, seems to be largely set by the time you reach adulthood. And so, some people are genetically gifted. I think we've all known those people that eat whatever they want and they just kind of keep a six pack most of the time. And so those people, I'm just going to give some number of examples. Those people may have 7 billion fat cells on their body, just as an example. But someone who is prone towards obesity, they might have 40 billion fat cells on their body. And you kind of ask like why this is important. I'm going to go off on like a side note here. It's like, so our body kind of reads how full these fat cells are. I mean, you just went through a prep, this better than anybody, unfortunately, because it's like prep is so brutal. When you're in the off season, you have these like full fat cells, filled with fatty acids. Hunger is low, energy's high, hormones are in a good spot, you have a better mood, your thinking is clear. But then as they, you pull energy out and they shrink up into these small, fat cells, you look better, but your body, a lot of times these are called adiposity signals because, the adipose tissue, adiposity signals, everything changes. Your body reads this energy level as low, right? So you have cloudy thinking, energy is low because your body's conserving hormone, thyroid hormones, sex hormones, they're all in the tank because your body's like, we're not in a spot to procreate. We have no energy reserves. Hunger is through the roof. Sleep is, disrupted. And so just everything feels bad. So I say that because a person with 7 billion fat cells, a low number of fat cells, they can have low body fat levels, but their fat cells will still be relatively filled. They just have less of them. Does that, you know what I mean? Like, so they're not getting all this feedback from their body that you're starving to death. You know what I mean? Like they feel comfortable. They don't have impaired sex drive and energy and hunger through the roof. But someone who's obese or, has the predisposition towards obesity, 40 billion, right? They can have more body fat, but their body's screaming at them, you're hungry, you're tired, you have no sex drive. So this is where I think, as a side note, people say, obesity is a choice. Yeah, if they act on it, if they continually act on these urges, but the two things aren't equal, right? They have someone that has the predisposition towards obesity, they have all these adiposity signals just screaming at them to eat, eat, eat. So it's like it would be comparable to someone else having to live their life like super shredded all the time. You know what I mean? And I've seen it. I've seen people that have that predisposition towards obesity, that are competitors. And if they try to stay like 25 pounds over show weight, even 30 pounds over show weight, they just are tired. Their hormones are in the tank, low testosterone levels. And it's like, then you take them to like, 40, 45 pounds over show weight. I've even seen 50 pounds over show weight. What do you know? Hormone levels are much better. So, okay. So I say that because, if you have 40 billion fat cells on your body, it's going to be very hard to get that extremely shredded look. And I guess when I look at you, I would say you have a fairly typical body fat number. You know what I mean? Like you're not out of the normal range. You have a normal, in the off season, you carry a pretty normal amount of body fat. You have a pretty high metabolic rate, but your body fat distribution is pretty average. And so one of the things that I think has probably held you back though from getting those really striated glutes is that I always am careful of this because when I'm dieting someone down, right? And I think that this is kind of a skill that I've developed over the years and something I've gotten to be good at. And a lot of coaches don't even realize that it's a thing you have to be good at, is that at a certain point of cutting people down, you have to be aware of when they're reaching their genetic limit. Because there is a certain point at which you're not going to be able to lose any more body fat. It's as simple as that. And, I think that, I'm often told that, and I feel this way too, that I do a good job of maintaining, good fullness in a lot of clients while still getting them lean. And I think it's because I'm very aware. Oftentimes I think that gets contributed to peaking, but really it's like knowing when you're approaching this limit. And so when you reach this limit, right, you're cutting body fat down, and then you hit this limit. What you're oftentimes going to find, the first sign, is that people are still losing weight, because if you're in a deficit, you're still going to lose weight. But there's a point reached where you continue to lose weight and then you just don't look any leaner. And when you lose weight and you don't look any leaner, that is the sign that you're there. You can't get any leaner. And then if you keep pushing, you're actually just going to look smaller and possibly even eventually less lean, because when you're losing weight and there's no more body fat to be lost, that energy is coming from somewhere. It's muscle tissue. So that's when you and I kind of had that discussion where I was like, I think we are starting to get lean. We're starting to lose weight, but we're not getting any leaner. So I think we've reached your limit, which kind of brings me back to one of the key components. Guy that's been training 4 years is comparing himself to a guy that's been training 16 years, is that more advanced competitors can get leaner because you have more muscle tissue. And so, you may have the same body fat total in terms of pounds or kilograms or whatever you measure it with, right? You have X amount of pounds or kilograms of body fat. But then as you continue to grow, it gets spread across a larger area. And therefore you do have lower body fat percentage wise. And it's spread across a large area and it's thinned out, and then you can see everything more clearly. So that's my long-winded answer of what contributes to getting those super shredded glutes.
It makes so much sense. And the description of kind of the number of body fat cells that you have, and that being kind of for example, people say obesity is a choice, is great, because I recently had Crystal on, Dr. Crystal, Mike Israel's wife. I hate saying it that way, but people know Mike, so they may not be aware of Crystal. But she's great, and she also has experience. She was talking about her experience with GPL-1 and using that drug to help in a situation where basically she had contest prep kind of diet symptoms, but was nowhere near the level of leanness you'd have someone competing at. And that's just because of her predisposition genetically to be feeling those things at a high level of body fat, which makes a ton of sense because when I talk to some of the leanest competitors I've seen, they really struggle in off season, and their food gets incredibly high. So there's probably like a metabolic component, and they don't seem to struggle as much to diet down as what you'd expect to get them there. But I think something you mentioned there was also like a level of muscularity and development, which I think holds some people back, where they kind of dig all the way there, but they haven't got any. It's like trying to get the six pack, but you don't really have developed abs. It's like you could just look skinny fat at that point. You could be 10% body fat, but you look 15, 20 because you just haven't got the muscle pushing out against the skin. And that's kind of the similar like level of development is in a similar sense, like the fullness or the peaking. Like if you haven't got a muscle full or peaked, it's just not going to press against the skin and look a certain way. But I definitely noticed that phenomenon that you described there happened to me in my last prep as well, where I continued to push because there were no real signs of things going haywire in terms of diet fatigue. And like you said, those things masking the look. But I just, especially my upper body, just started flattening out big time. And I noticed that this time round from the Netherlands, really not too much from the Netherlands to Swiss show, but then the weeks from the Swiss show into Worlds. I look back at photos now and I'm like, whoa, my upper body just started getting quite stringy and flat. And my glutes, they came in leaner. I definitely lost some additional body fat, but it wasn't it probably wasn't worth the trade-off.
There was definitely a percentage switch, right, in where the energy came from.
Yes.
Your glutes did get leaner. I also think we learned more about how to peak you. We changed some peaking things in the final, especially the final show. We did some things that I thought worked really well. We had to push your body weight lower than we wanted for that one, which I also think had a trade-off. But I think that is an interesting thing too, is like, well, and it kind of goes into like making judgment calls. And, sometimes it's interesting. There's this whole like thing with coaching where I get a lot of coaches and they want to know like the formulas and what do you do with this situation and what do you do with that situation. And even, I've run mentorships before and people want like clear cut protocols. And I always tell them, no, I'm like, if I give you protocols, I was like, what you're after being absolved of responsibility of your choices. If I hand you over protocols, well, these are Cliff's protocols. And I'm like, you have to actually make a judgment call in every single prep. And like you said, I don't always think pushing that limit is necessarily a bad thing because you don't really know your limits until oftentimes you've pushed a little beyond them, if that makes sense. And it's like, honestly, we got your glutes leaner, but I think it's also valuable information for your future preps. You know what I mean? Like, okay, there is a point at which your glutes can be leaner, but is it worth that upper body trade-off? And so I just think that there's always so much good information to be had from like sometimes even going beyond those limits. But, once again, it's just a judgment call by judgment call base. And so I think that, even adding things like hip thrusts, because this also becomes site specific. It's not just total body fat level. A lot of times guys that look shredded everywhere, but don't have a lot of striations in the glute area or another particular area. They haven't maybe maximized the muscle mass in that area. So training that specific area will eventually get it leaner. Because once again, more muscle tissue pushing out against the body fat in that area will create extra lines, extra striations, things like that.
Yeah, the thing I wanted to reflect on was that trade-off, because it becomes very apparent in an off-season, hey, you can only push the surplus a certain size because that ratio of body fat, like the partitioning ratio, quickly escalates into just extra body fat, and everyone understands that. And we know as you lose body fat, the higher risk you are at losing muscle mass at some point. And when you're getting down to those essential for that individual level of body fat, that trade-off can quickly be like, you can only be in such a small deficit without sacrificing any muscle. It's like, that's where it's like, the scale might not even be very indicative of progress at that point. You have to like use visuals, and it's just a challenging kind of tightrope to balance at that stage. And I will say we definitely pushed harder than I've pushed before because some of the diet fit. I was really good most of prep. That last push we did, I only really realized now in hindsight, looking back, I was like, man, I was so cold all the time, like colder than I've been in previous preps, and I was very irritable and my mood was not great.
When we shook hands at Worlds, I was like, this guy's hand is freezing. Yeah. And, I think that's the thing is like, that's the other thing too, is, I get a lot of competitors, they're like, we'll be 25 weeks out. And they're like, day one of prep, let's go, and I'm like, I don't want you to have that attitude at 25 weeks out, because in the last 5 weeks, I do think I pushed people harder in the last 5 weeks than they usually push. But if we haven't conserved energy before that point, you're not going to have it in the tank. Do you know what I mean? It's
sprint finish.
Yeah. It's like if you've been pushing hard for 25 weeks, you're going to have nothing left in those last 5. And so, it is a balancing act. And like you said, I examining your prep, I actually like my personal preference. I liked the look we had at the second show the best. I thought that was, your glutes were really sharp. I remember I posted that back double bicep shot of you. Your glutes were in, you were full. That was my favorite look personally. This is the second show. And I think we could have probably matched that had we not like tried to make weight for the final show. But that was in my opinion, I think that was the best look achieved for you. The combination of really shredded everywhere, still maintaining. You were fuller at the first show, but leaner at the second. And I guess I would say, but this is where the subjectivity comes in. You know what I mean? Like every person has their own favorite look, even within the same person. So I would say second show was probably my favorite look for you.
Yeah. So it's actually, like, I was going to ask if there was a favorite look throughout the season. And it's challenging actually, even as because of reflecting back at it. And we've talked about photos and lighting and how much of a difference that can make. And we haven't got the professional photos from Worlds yet. But obviously we both know, and it's been talked about, that the stage lighting wasn't ideal. And so
I don't think you're going to get as much information of that.
No.
I thought we learned a lot by the photos I took you backstage at Worlds. Like I thought you looked super lean, but and that goes to like, the different stage shots and stuff like that. But I guess, and you were even saying like personal preference. So typically, because this is our first time working together, typically what I do too is like, so we've kind of like even seen now the range, right? From first show to last show. One of the things that I've said this before, even on this podcast, is like, the longer I work with someone, the more I develop like rapport with them. And generally, once I've kind of established a range with somebody, like, now you have this range, then in future preps, I usually consult with them on what look do you like. Does that make sense? Like,
you asked me actually.
Yeah, what do you want to bring? You know what I mean? And by the end of this season, we started to get that report. You know what I mean? It's like, because like sometimes I in the first time I work with somebody, sometimes I'm trying to establish for me and for them, what are the range of looks we can bring that we would view as acceptable looks to bring to the stage? Do you know what I mean? Because sometimes clients think like, they're like, I'm worried about getting any leaner. And in my opinion, they're like outside of that acceptable look. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I kind of like to establish this range. And then in future preps, okay, if we've established this acceptable looks to bring to the stage, where do we want it to land? And I think that's part of like the coach athlete, relationship, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think I could imagine a lot of people just go straight for like as shredded as possible. But in my head, I'm always just like, whatever makes me most competitive. But the challenge with that is just as you said, judges are subjective and it could change depending on, for example, the lighting at Worlds, I think was said it kind of favored silhouettes and kind of more fullness versus kind of that shredded look. And so you might think, for Steve, more competitive would be conditioning, but on the stage or on the judge, so you're always gambling a little bit there, aren't you?
Yeah, and that's another thing that a lot of people miss out on as well, is that, okay, what does it take to get to elite conditioning? Another factor is that some of the most elite conditioned guys are also super big. So not only is their body fat being spread across a larger area, but they have so much muscle mass, they have the ability to say, I'm going to give some up to get this look. And I always think back to I think it was Brian Whitaker did kind of a post where he was showing like what he looked like at like 6 weeks out. And Brian Whitaker is more muscular than most people think. Uh, but at 6 weeks out, he would be a good competitor. And actually, people would say he has good muscle mass. You know what I mean? Like, but then he makes the decision. He made the decision. I give some up to reach this elite conditioning. So he has the genetic ability, but then he also makes that judgment call of, I'm not just going to be a good competitor with good size. Yeah, now I will be a competitor with he's giving up some of his size and trading in for a lot of elite conditioning. So it's a judgment call that he makes where you have to have enough size to be able to give some up. And unfortunately, because you and I can relate, you and I have some similar body types and similar structures. Oftentimes we don't have the fullness to make that decision. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It becomes a clear call. We shouldn't give that up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's unfortunate because I think my preference has always been condition, and I know I can get there and I'm willing to push and what have you. And actually, I can get conditioning easier than some other people. I think I have a kind of slight proclivity towards that. But I think that's actually counter to where sometimes my best look is. I look like when I've got hindsight looking at it and I'm like, oh, some of those fuller looks are just really nice. But it's like, yeah, it's always a bit of a trade-off. But this is where future off seasons and every year or every season I've had, at least I can speak to, like I've been able to get a little bit more conditioned, of which conditioning has always been good, with more size. And that's allowed me to be more competitive every time. It just takes a long time for some of us.
Yeah, and this is also where, well, we were kind of discussing it before we even flipped on the recording thing, is that I think training becomes so important. Because actually the front of your body, in my opinion, reached elite conditioning. But I think that the back of your body has like, and actually not even so much your glutes, but your back. And so like sometimes this comes into how do you perform exercises to hit certain areas. Everybody always thinks programming, but in my opinion, a lot of the magic of being able to target certain specific areas, lower lats being one of them. I think lower lats is such a crucial part of great conditioning on stage. But how do you target them? I can put rows, any number of rows, into people's programming, but then being able to row in a manner that targets the lower lats is the key.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know we discussed this, and that was an area where you're like, I think that should be a focus for you in off season. It's been a focus the last like 4 years. Is like, Kasim Hansen from N1.
Yes, yeah,
does a lot of work on biomechanics. So I've been using a lot of those sort of like lat specific movements to try and kind of target that area, because obviously structure wise, it also helps try and kind of build that up for the width. So yeah, I mean, I just thought I'd touch on that at least. And we're on the topic of peaking. And so that was a question I had for you in terms of, we chose the rapid backload, even for the earlier show at the Netherlands. And then we discussed other peaking strategies towards the second show and final show. But I'd love to know kind of what led you to pick that peaking approach for me specifically. And yeah, we can have a back and forth.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was wanting to try a different peaking strategy at the final show, but with needing to make weight, it just didn't work out that way. Because I do like to try a couple of different things within the same season for most people, because once again, you're establishing just what does it look like. But I did think it was going to work out well for you, because generally what I look for is someone with a high metabolic rate, someone that can process food quickly, because also sometimes you have people that have fast metabolisms, but they might be prone to different digestive issues. You had never once really complained much about digestive issues, and you handle food very well. And also, I like it for people that just really need to fill out and come in full. And I also find that peaking strategy tends to work on people that tend to have. Now, this is I think we've discussed this on other podcasts, but like you had a certain thinness or texture to your skin that always looked kind of it's not even so much the muscle tissue I'm looking at, because I could say grainy, but just the even in the areas where you didn't have as many striations, like say the glutes or the back, your skin still looked thin. And I find that this approach tends to work. This look tends to lend very well to the rapid backload. Um, I find that when I see those situations, a more aggressive loading style works well. So the faster the carbs come up, the fuller and tighter that look will get. And we kind of saw that, like there, I think it was your second show where we saw some stage shots of like your most muscular, and we're like, whoa, you're really popping out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so generally, even sometimes where I'll have clients on the other end of the spectrum where they'll have all the requisite lines, right? The glutations, but then something about their skin tends to look, for lack of a better term, thick, and I think this is something that you kind of develop an eye for over the years. I try to shy away from more aggressive loading strategies. And this is where bodybuilding becomes such a, do you remember the first time you ever laid sight on a bodybuilding lineup? I remember thinking, all these guys look the same. Like you saw it, saw it maybe like a magazine. You know what I mean? You're like, okay, 10th place is one big guy, first place is another big guy. And it's like you get to this point where you can differentiate such smaller and smaller variance between these individuals, and then eventually you reach the point where I'm judging the texture of someone's skin.
Yes.
Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. Additionally, you get access to our exclusive Revive Stronger member site, where you'll be able to watch over hundreds of hours worth of educational content. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
I know exactly that. I think there's mine. I think is that like thin skin look. But there's competitors who have even thinner, I would say, than even I was able to get. Like where I'm just like, they look so tight. I can't even imagine ever looking as tight as them. And I don't know I don't know how to describe it apart from you just see it from experience, where it's so tight, like their cling film, like over their muscles. It kind of look.
Yeah. And there's something to be able to identify, because you're a coach and a good coach yourself. And I think that there's something also being able to identify pattern recognition. And it's kind of funny. My dad is he's retired now, but a PhD plant pathologist. And I remember I would go to his house in the summers because he, didn't live near me. And sometimes I would have to go with him into the field, like the literal field. And he would have to breed plants. And I remember he would have to choose plants to breed, and some days we would have to look at like thousands, tens of thousands, even like 100,000 plants. And he would try to look at them, and then all of these plants look the same to me. I'm a kid. And he would be like, okay, these are the two out of like 50,000 plants. And I'd be like, okay, how do you know? And he was like, something about the texture, something about the texture of the leaf or something like that. And he's like, just tells me from my experience, this is going to work. And so I hate that I don't have a more concrete answer to give, to people listening other than the texture of your skin. But it really is that.
I totally get it. And yeah, I think in many areas you could say the same thing. I know from, obviously this is specific to bodybuilding, but like judging, one of the key lessons that has been talked about on like our judging coaching for the WNBF is like trust your gut, because everyone there on the panel is experienced, and that is kind of like a bit of a, again, pattern recognition, trusting your gut. You kind of have, you can just look at it and you're just like, yep, there. And you get better and better at that as you judge more shows. So I totally relate to that. Something I wanted to ask Cliff was, is there ever a time where you don't give someone, you think they might respond well to a rapid backload, but you're not sure they could execute it? Because I will say some elements of the rapid backload, even on I think it was only the last one, I was frustrated with myself because you were like X amount more potato or something, and I was like, damn, I've run out of that, and I've run out of olive oil because I didn't bring enough olive oil, and obviously there's just travel and restrictions which made it a bit more challenging. But is there ever a time that's kind of stopped you using that approach or made you change from using it because it was too much for them to kind of manage all the variables?
Yeah, the biggest one, and it's common, the biggest one though is that if they are a nervous individual, if they're anxious, because also there's a certain flow of how someone looks on the day of loading. I think you kind of noticed this, like you start off, you pound carbs right out of the gate, right? And you get very vascular. And there are some people that they can't stop analyzing themselves. And like they see the veins pop out, but I mean, you're not actually bigger at this point. You just have veins popping out because there's so much glucose flooding your bloodstream. So sometimes they'll be like, I really like this look. And I'm like, it's not going to translate to stage, right? And then you reach this point where it's like, also you're kind of like riding a carb high because you've been restricting and now it's flooding. And then you reach a midpoint during the day where you look good, and then towards the end of the day, you usually look even a tiny bit softer after having so many carbs. And I think it's often to the body just sort of getting a little backlogged with trying to synthesize glycogen. And that's quite the roller coaster to take someone on in terms of like your look has changed so much within a 12-hour period. I don't think everyone can handle that mentally. There are individuals where they just get nervous with every change. I don't give that to those people. In fact, and it's a shame because there are some people that I think it would be really suited for, but their mentality is so anxious that I don't think they could handle it. And so that's the most common reason I won't give it.
Interesting.
And it's more off. It's not rare also, by the way, that and not even the rapid backload, but a more aggressive loading style, even a 2-day load or, something more aggressive in that manner. It's quite often where I think they can physically handle it, but not mentally, because there are some people that are very scared of change. And so throwing rapid changes at them is not the best thing. And it's funny because I learned that early on, and it can affect their mentality so much that I think it can affect their look. And I've experienced it a couple of times where I've had competitors where I'm sure that they couldn't handle it mentally. And then over the course of an off season, they go to therapy, they deal with their anxiety, maybe they take some anti-anxiety medication or get some, antidepressants or whatever. And then I can actually give them the load that I think would work for them. And it works fantastically because they address their anxiety issues. But anxiety is actually more common in bodybuilders than I think people realize. I think a lot of people are anxious, so they gravitate towards the sport, which they can control every variable of their life.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I would say I'm like, I don't like to say it, but I would say I'm probably like a slightly highly strung individual. Like I get anxious quite easily, but during prep, that anxiety kind of goes for me. I become very apathetic and I just don't care about much and I worry way less, which is really helpful at certain points in prep. But I think also because it was my 10 years of competing, the amount of experience, knowledge, I know how these things work. I have huge trust in you. I wasn't checking my physique unless you were asking for physique updates. Like I just wasn't looking. So yeah, I didn't have any anxiety about the approach. It was only if I was only ever worried if I fucked something up, like, oh, I didn't quite weigh enough there, or ounces to grams to to all the different like raw or cooked weights. Sometimes I was like, have I done it right here? But for the most part, that was all right.
Well, even with peaking, that throws some people off, because I usually give people cooked measurements during peak week of things. And the reason for that, they're like, well, can you give me raw? And I'm like, no, I don't want you to have raw. I want you to have cooked measurements, because we're going to be changing things so rapidly. I need you to have pre-cooked stuff. And they're like, and I'm like, I need you to have pre-cooked stuff so I can say, take this much out, put this much in. And even that stresses people out. You know, peak week is a stressful time for a lot of people. But no, you never struck me as anxious throughout any part of it. You were kind of real go with the flow. And and I think you can tell I'm usually pretty go with the flow as well. You know, and so I think that, you know, and I don't think a lot of coaches pinpoint that is also part of your responsibility to put your clients at ease. Like, you know, let them know, hey, I've got your back. We've got this. And you did fantastic. You handled every bit. And there was never any question of whether or not you'd be able to handle it. I knew you'd be able to get it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I can't tell you. And again, that's a great lesson for me as a coach. Like any of those little things, like you said, where you'd put me at ease or you'd give me a little bit of like a thumbs up, like it meant the world. Like, and it actually motivated me like nothing else. I was like, oh, Cliff's happy, I'm happy. Like, and so I've taken that into my own coaching even further, where I'm just like, yeah, I know, like my words have a lot of power here.
Yeah. You know, and you know, it's funny because, I think some coaches, they, how do I put this? I'm not trying to sound insulting here, but they almost overpraise.
Yes.
And they try to praise in every email. And I try to say it when I really mean it, if that makes sense. Because if you praise in every email, then your client doesn't even know if they're like getting the truth from you. You know what I mean? And so it's like, I really just try to make sure I say it when I really mean it. So that way, they know, because also my clients come to know that I'm going to criticize when I really mean it as well. So that way, when I'm praising, they know I actually mean it, because if I don't like what they're doing, they're going to hear that from me too. And so I think that, I don't know, I just try to be as honest with my clients as possible, because, you know, it's important that you guys stay on the same page, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree. I actually said this to Mike, who you met, Mike Chalice. He's a very positive person, and he's very often just says things are amazing. And I'm like, Mike, you literally, this sandwich you've bought cannot be amazing. It's just average at best. He was like, you can be positive, but you don't. If everything's amazing, then when you say something's amazing, it means nothing to me. You have to, like, where do you go from amazing? So it's a similar situation there, where it's like, if you just praise, it's just like, hey, I'm so used to this. It's just it doesn't mean anything to me. So yeah, holding that praise when you truly mean it, I think is the best move.
Yeah. You know what? And as a side note, just as a coaching aspect, and you know, it's funny, but I actually got some clarity in my own coaching several years ago. I don't know if you know who Katie Ann is.
Yes.
She doesn't compete anymore, but she last competed in 2017, I believe. 2017, and she won WNBF Worlds that year in figure. And I was coaching her, and I coached her, you know, for her pro debut, and then she qualified for Worlds, and then she won Worlds in her first pro season. And, you know, she said something to me after the season that I didn't even realize I was doing it, but I've kind of like taken it more to heart, where I try to be more of that. She said she had always been so anxious and nervous in her past preps and with other coaches, because she didn't know what was going to happen. You know, it didn't know if, you know, we were going to make the right calls or whatever. And she said, I kind of felt like no matter what came up, you were going to make sure it was right. And she's like, no matter what, she goes, I always told myself, no matter what, Cliff's got this. And I guess I was like, I'm glad I could be that for her. But I was like, you know, I think I need to think about that every time I work with a client. It's like, I want them to know whatever happens, we've got this. You know what I mean? You know, we hit a snag, we've got this. And I think even when we were on show day and you didn't have like whatever food I'd asked you for. And I was like, no big deal. We've got this. You know what I mean? Like there's always a way to figure it out and troubleshoot it. And it's not a big deal.
Yeah. It's my perfectionist mindset was like, I don't want to have the wrong fat. I want to have the fats or whatever it was that we wanted to have. But I agree with that completely. Like, so your client has full trust and faith in you, then it's always going to help.
Yeah. And, you know, the funny thing is, even as a coach, you also know, you have to know that you actually do have it. You know what I mean? And I think that for me, an early part of that was in 2013, I was rapid backloading somebody and all their food went bad. Every bit of it. And we were on the road and traveling together. And I finished the rapid backload with potatoes from Wendy's, the fast food restaurant, and Twizzlers. And he looked awesome and he won his pro card. And that to me, I guess, was solidifying to me as a coach is no matter what happens, I'll figure this out. You know what I mean? Like, and so I think that once you know as a coach, no matter what comes up, you'll figure it out. I think it also kind of lends to the client feeling like you guys will figure it out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My final comment on the rapid backload, just from a personal experience and kind of a peaking philosophy I had, was always like reducing stress leading into a show, which I think some peaking methods lend themselves to better than others. For me, one of the most stressful part of peaking, I think, was the fluids and having to pee all the time, and having that urgency to pee when traveling in particular sometimes is a really bad mix. So yeah, I will say my sleep was the worst during peak weeks. And like that is a stress, but it's like, I guess for you, it's a key component of that recipe working well.
Yeah, I push fluids very high. In a lot of peaks, not even just rapid backloading, I push fluids very high, and it does interrupt sleep a little bit. And I also think that if you do that a couple times during peak week, you start to learn better how to do it, so it hinders your sleep less. Like you front load the water a little bit more. But the main thing is I'm trying to get fluid moving through so quickly that eventually by the time show day comes around, almost no fluid is lingering in the body. You know, it's just shuttled out at this expedited rate. And it is a stressor. I do believe it is a stressor, but it's also one of those things that, you get this thing where it's like, it's a stressor, which can sometimes contribute to water retention, but it's a stressor that's inherently reducing water retention. So even if it's a stressor, it doesn't really show up on the body. So it kind of, you know, I found over the years it's a net positive rather than a negative.
That's what I presumed, because having gone through it, I was like, hey, I know when I'm stressed, I get edema. Like if I travel, normally I get edema and stuff like this. But even through doing that peaking approach, like I never had that water retention that I sometimes get. So I'm like, hey, even though my sleep is pretty trash and this is inherently stressful, like you said, it's leading to a tight look no matter what. So that's why I never was like, hey, I don't think we should do this. I was like, hey, if this is the cost and this is the benefit, even it's working in our favor, I'm someone seeking to be at the highest level they can possibly bring it, that's a sacrifice I'm willing to kind of put through. It's not a problem.
Yeah. And it is a real cost benefit analysis. And I think that, you know, we had that discussion a couple times during prep. Bodybuilders can be these real binary thinkers. More is better type thinking. And then also I think that, you know, the funny enough, I think a lot of times the more real grinded out working, I don't want to say it, the more meatheadish type bodybuilders, they tend to fall in the category of more is better. I'll do more and more and more. And I think sometimes the scientific minded individuals tend to like, how do I simplify this process, work smarter, you know? And I think that really it's like, at least for me, I try to take it on a protocol by protocol basis, and protocol by protocol for that individual of cost benefit. Every protocol you institute has a cost and a benefit, and then what is our net at the end of that process? And so just trying to avoid that binary thinking. And so water being one of them. And it's like, I know because I mean, I definitely know because clients are constantly like, I'm peeing so much. This is so inconvenient. I have meetings and I'm like, okay, can you make it work logistically? And they're like, well, yeah, I can make it work. And I'm like, I think we need to keep it.
Yeah. There was a
Yeah.
few times I was on the London Underground for like 90 minutes. So I was like, I'm peeing every 30 minutes. What the hell? And I was like trying to hold as long as I could. I had to get out like 2 stops before and just like rush behind a bin and pee on the street. I was just like, it's too much. So yeah, that happened. I know we haven't got that much time, but I do want to touch on a couple of points. So one would be like your post-show plans for me in terms of, obviously we're now almost 3 weeks since the stage. And actually, this morning I was 171 pounds. So like not that much up from like a full stage look. So yeah, what your kind of plans are there. And then for me as an individual to come back to stage as improved, what things do you have in mind that I need to work on during this off season? If there's anything specific that you have in mind.
Yeah. For the post-show period, I kind of have 2 primary goals for everybody. And what that looks like is different for everybody. But get back to normalcy as fast as possible and do so with as minimal body fat accumulation as possible. And I think that sometimes people prioritize one or the other too much. Right? If you're trying to minimize body fat accumulation as much as possible, then it's going to hinder, because those are 2 opposing things to a certain degree, is that you're going to delay your return to normalcy, and normalcy being full energy, full hormone levels, everything being as is usual in an off season. But I think that there's something to be said for just adding body fat, because I've known people that have added 20, 30 pounds within the first couple of weeks and they still don't feel normal. I think duration of surplus is important. Interestingly enough, I've also read the studies that show that coming out of a cut and then returning back to normal maintenance calories, the surplus calories, the hormone levels recover. I am not fully convinced that is for everybody, and definitely not after such a traumatic thing like a contest prep. Because anyone who's ever prepped will tell you, no matter how much body fat you add in the first 2 weeks, you can't feel normal after 2 weeks. And so I try to strike that balance between getting back to normal and minimizing body fat. And so some people will say, why are you so worried about minimizing body fat? Because where you land once normalcy is reached will dictate how long you can stay in a surplus and grow thereafter. I've seen so many people by the time they finally get back to normal, they're like, man, I'm so fat, I need to cut. Which is a horrible situation to be in, because I think that dieting too soon, even a mini cut, dieting too soon after a real prep where someone has gotten so lean like you did, the hormones are ready to go right back in the tank really quickly. The body seems to have this really reactionary response to deficit for quite a while after getting so lean. And so I really want to keep people, I want them to be really pretty darn lean by the time normalcy is reached. So then honestly, I don't like to see people cutting for at least 9 to 12 months after the prep, because they really need to recover properly and grow and spend some good time in a surplus, even if it's a small surplus. So that's my main goal. It's like, I want to see what the leanest spot you can be at while reaching normalcy. So then you can just kind of like sail off into your off season without having to think of cutting for a really long time.
Yeah.
And you know, sometimes when you play it that way, you do end up taking a little bit longer than you maybe like. But sometimes I'm like, you know, if someone is delaying normalcy for 3 or 4 weeks, I will take that for the benefit of not having to cut for months and months. That's my approach.
Yeah, I think it's actually really well explained, and I like the way that you put that in terms of those opposing demands, and also on top of that, there is a time component, so you can't kind of rush the process, as it were, because I do see that happening as well. And obviously there was a time where the reverse diet was very, very popular, and that was like, hey, that's too slow. And then the recovery diet, or people, first of all, it was like rebounding way too fast. Then it was a reverse diet, probably too slow. Recovery diet from 3DMJ, which sounds a similar philosophy to you, I would say, with the way they present that. And yeah, the way I always think about it is trying to get to that lower end intervention point over a reasonable time course of like 6 to 10 weeks. And yeah, if you rush that, and it's never perfect, and I think people expect perfection, and you just want to avoid extremes of that individual who's like checking their glutes every morning and like, are they still striated? If they're striated, thumbs up. It's like, no, that's not the goal right now. It's like you want to be recovered, but yeah, you don't want to be like edema and puffy cheeks like after 2 weeks, ideally.
and not to mention mentally, nobody's in their right state after a prep. Like, I mean, like by all objective measures, you are still shredded. But I'm sure you look at yourself and think there are moments, right? I'm sure there's moments where you think I look so bad right now.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Because I've been there, I've been there where I've had like, I do still have lines in my glutes and people are like turning their head at the gym. And I think to myself, I look so bad right now because I don't look like I did, As for your off season, I think, obviously everybody goes in the off season with the goal of more muscle mass, but I think really targeted muscle mass. And I know that this sounds like I would like to see more glute development to get those glutes in more. We talked about this already, but I'd like to see, I think that there is a scapular sticking point for you. What I mean by that is I can tell by the way you do your back double bicep and the way your muscle mass is, we were talking about this. I take training very seriously, even though I don't end up talking about it as much because actually I think training oftentimes has a little bit more individuality than nutrition at times. And I can tell by the way you perform your back double bicep and the way your muscle mass is developed on your back. I think that there's like, a stickiness to your scapula that I would probably want to see worked on to where once that is resolved, I think your back training will then become more effective. And so, and being able to target specific areas, that mid and lower trap area, and then being able to do a row the same. Honestly, I think the type of row, sometimes people nitpick because you can give me a straight bar cable row. Let me use that as an example. I like that move, straight bar cable row, and I can adjust my torso and my scapular motion. I can hit my upper back, my rhomboids, my, mid lower traps, and then I can do the same motion, same movement, completely change my scapular movement where my shoulder girdle sits, and then I can just hit lower lats and barely touch the upper back portion. So I think that getting some better scapular control will continue to build up that back. And then I think not only will you go in with more size, I think that your back will get grainier and denser and leaner in future preps. And then it just kind of like makes you that much more dangerous when you turn your back to the judges. But overall, man, I guess I want to wrap this up and say I really enjoyed the process because working with somebody who has been in it as long as you and is as passionate as you, I think we had some really good exchanges along the way about what we liked about the process and what we were seeing. And for me as a coach, that was just, it was super enjoyable and you did so good. And I think it was really gratifying to see, because at the beginning of the season, you're like, I just hope I can really contend for a pro card. And then boom, we got the pro card right out of the gate. And then there you are at Worlds. And even the moment I was talking to everyone in the audience when you walked out on stage at Worlds and you got that spot where the lighting was fishy, but you stood in the spot where there was actually some good lighting. You hit that most muscular, and all of us go, whoa. And it was just a great moment where you got to be on stage at Worlds and the people in the audience go, whoa. It was just really good for me, personally, at least.
I appreciate that big time, Cliff, and very interesting notes about things to improve upon for the off season that I've definitely taken into account with some of my training already. And yeah, I appreciate having the opportunity to work with you. Like I said to you as well, I was like unsure if I'd even be of a caliber of person you'd want to work with, because that's something I've always dealt with, is like some self-doubt. And I know at the start of prep, when I was trying to bait you to be like, yeah, I think you can go pro, Steve. At no point did you give me I think you can go pro. And I was like, oh, does that mean he doesn't think I can go pro? So anyway, it doesn't change anything. I was like, I don't know why I'm trying to bait Cliff to say this, because it doesn't change anything. If he thinks I can, I'm going to do the same thing. If he thinks I can't, I'm going to try and prove him wrong or whatever. I'm still going to do the same thing, just execute the process. So yeah, when I ended up getting the pro card, it was that show was a huge shock. It wasn't even one that we planned to do. It was like not last minute, but it was like, hey, let's see if we can get another one in there. So yeah, it's just how bodybuilding sometimes goes. And yeah, thank you for being in my corner for that. It's been one hell of a year. You know more than a lot of the audience will know how tough of a year it's been for me on a personal front. And so to have capped it off and be at Worlds and have you there was a really cool moment. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for being here, Cliff. And yeah, I'm sure I'll have to bring you on many times in this next year, and we'll talk soon.
I look forward to it. Thanks again, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality, and we know how to do it, and we will help you achieve this. The Minicut movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.